For many of you, it's the last week to make it to the fantasy postseason. If you need a last-minute tune-up, well, you've got Jamey Eisenberg as your mechanic. Hey, how are you, folks? Jason Horowitz, glad to be with you on Move Makers, part of the CBSSports.com Fantasy Football Series. And let's get right to it and bring in the man from Miami, our CBSSports.com senior fantasy writer. And, Jamey, we've got a tale of two Petersons this weekend. One coming back, that'd be the one for the Vikings, and one flushed into the starting lineup here, in which many have been calling for weeks. If you need one guy for 1 week to make the playoffs, which is the better move?
Well, I'm taking the guy that's the leading rusher in the NFL that's facing the Detroit Lions, even with a bad leg, as opposed to the guy facing the Giants, who was the backup to Cedric Benson. So if it's one Adrian Peterson, I'm taking all day as opposed to the other one.
But are you nervous a little bit that the guy is going to be running? It's still a torn ligament. I mean, he still has a torn ligament on the outside of his knee.
Yeah, absolutely. He's not going to be 100%, and he also has to deal with sharing carries with Chester Taylor. But again, we've seen this Detroit defense give up a lot of yards to Ryan Grant on Thanksgiving. They've had their moments where they certainly have fallen apart defensively. You know, I think they're a defense going in the other direction as this team is sort of falling apart. I know that's not what you want to hear as a Lions guy, but you know, looking at Adrian Peterson, the rookie, he's certainly been great all season long, and you hope that could continue even with the knee injury.
What is this? You're ripping on my boy Sean Alexander? You're ripping on the Lions? What, do we have to get into something else here? Nothing personal on this show, Jamey. All right, how about Colby Smith, the man, by the way, that I did drop for Sean Alexander. Great first start to his career, but that was against the Raiders. What's his role going forward? Obviously the starter, but what do you expect as a fantasy owner?
Well, I think you got to look at it that Brody Correll is still the quarterback for the Chiefs, and Herm Edwards is still the coach, so they're going to want to run the ball. And I think, you know, you've seen the Chiefs' offensive line make some progress. As long as Larry Johnson remains out with the foot injury, which could last all season, as we've heard, you know, the chance for him to have success is there. And so I think you look at this week against San Diego. We've seen San Diego, Adrian Peterson, you know, set the NFL rushing record with 296 yards. They've given up rushing touchdowns 2 of their last 3 games to Jacksonville and last week to Willis McGahee. So I think that, you know, Smith can have some success this week, and I think it's just going to be a week-to-week basis depending on what happens with Johnson. Yeah,
Larry Johnson could be out for the year. Many people have also seen or heard or read about him dancing up a storm at a New York party that he threw for himself on his birthday. No, you know, I wasn't invited. You know what? It's because I'm boys with Sean Alexander. That must be the case.
That's right. That's
Jamey,
true.
What about the roles for backups who have become starters? They've thrown themselves into that mold. They've done well for fantasy users. Namely, you've got a guy like Andre Hall, Selvin Young's coming back. What's the role for guys like that here? You know, Anthony Thomas, another one. If, by say, Marshawn Lynch does play, what's the role for those guys?
Well, I think you look at Buffalo and Anthony Thomas dealing with a calf injury himself. So Dwayne Wright is another backup who may step up this week and be a starter against Washington. So, you know, you're looking at Andre Hall. He's probably going to share carries with Selvin Young, which, you know, is not what you want to see because we've seen a history in Denver of backups and tandems, you know, creeping up in that situation. But you look at guys like Justin Fargas, Ron Dane. These guys have been very serviceable fantasy options for a lot of owners. And I think as long as they continue to be starters and the matchup is favorable, they could certainly be started in your fantasy league and potentially be started for you in your playoffs.
If you need one guy, Jamey, to make your maybe this was not going to make or break you go into the playoffs, but if you need one receiver to fill in this week, who's out there for some help?
Well, I like what I saw from Anthony Gonzalez, you know, the rookie for the Colts, stepping up in the absence of Marvin Harrison, you know, and I think as long as Harrison remains out, when you have Peyton Manning throwing you the ball, that's certainly going to be a great option for you to use. You know, you look at Justin Gage has really stepped up in Tennessee as Vince Young's #1 option. You know, Arnez Battle has been somewhat of an improvement, you know, as the #1 guy really for the 49ers, not getting a lot of catches, but, you know, producing and getting some, you know, fantasy production. A guy that I'm curious about, just because the Patriots, as they march toward the playoffs and their Super Bowl run, is Jabbar Gaffney. Had a great game against Philadelphia, and if they start to rest guys, you know, especially Randy Moss, Wes Welker, Dante Stallworth, Gaffney, as long as Brady's throwing the ball, and even if it's Matt Castle, you know, Gaffney could have some value in that offense.
Yeah, certainly can, and we saw that this week. And you know, with this team, you never know. Going up against the Baltimore defense that has been giving up a lot of points of late, certainly that could be a case as well. All right, one thing that you and I disagree on, and that's something that maybe people want to hear about in move makers, as far as whether to put Pittsburgh guys on the bench or keep Pittsburgh guys in the starting lineup. 2 bad weeks. I say you have to throw out the second one because of the field conditions. It looked like mush, Jim. I mean, it looked like they were playing on cream of wheat. But you disagree here, huh?
Well, I don't necessarily disagree that the field played a part in what happened there, but I think you got to look at it as 2 bad weeks with a defensive coach as they're starting to get a little bit more conservative. The offensive line in Pittsburgh not as good as it was last year. Willie Parker has been very productive, but he's not scoring. You're asking a lot of Ben Roethlisberger, and I think we see that they're very happy to win games 3-0. So whether it's the weather playing a part or it's just them being conservative and trusting their defense and not necessarily want to make mistakes, you're going to see this a little bit from Pittsburgh. So there is a little bit of a concern from a fantasy perspective because Roethlisberger has emerged as a number 1 option. Again, Willie Parker, you're not going to bench him. The receiver situation, is it Santonio Holmes, the number 1 guy? Is it Hines Ward, Heath Miller? Are you going to start him as your number 1 tight end when he was drafted as a backup? So there are a lot of concerns to look at with this Pittsburgh Steelers offense going forward as, again, they're trying to hold on to maybe possibly get that number 2 seed in the AFC.
Happy to leave with a win, but nobody was happy in that game in Pittsburgh, including the people who had to watch that game on Monday Night Football. Jamey, always great insight as well, sir, and we'll catch up with you throughout the week and get all the best from you as we continue here.
I look forward to it, Jason. Have a good weekend.
You too, sir. All right, folks, that's it for Move Makers. But for more, I promise Jamey Eisenberg and Dave Richard will be pumping out material all week long to try and sneak you into the postseason. So be sure to stay with CBSSports.com for that, and be sure to watch everything else all over the CBS Audience Network. For Jamey Eisenberg, I'm Jason Horowitz. Take care.